Well, cerebral palsy is a neurological condition when a child has an insult before they're born. So typically, there's something happens with this decreased blood flow and they get a brain injury and it tends to be global. So, and it depends on what part of the brain's affected. Sometimes it's speech, sometimes it's motor, sometimes it's everything. Sometimes the thing called lock-in syndrome where the person cognitively is really bright, but they just can't use their body. Hers was caused by crystal meth exposure throughout the pregnancy that her birth mother used, as well as she had a stroke before she was born. So she came into the world with a pretty dire diagnosis.
Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. Hey friend, welcome back to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm Jenn Trepeck, your host and health coach, here with you every week for Wellness Without the Weirdness. And this week we're talking about a word that can be really scary. And that word is uncurable. This week's guest says, maybe not so much. Maybe there is something or a few things that you can do. So let me introduce him. His functional medicine journey began when traditional healthcare failed Anna, his adopted daughter, with cerebral palsy. Despite being a physician, he felt helpless as specialists offered no solutions, only surgery and medications. Witnessing his daughter's impossible transformation shattered everything he believed about medicine, and this transformed his entire practice of medicine, and now he's become the doctor to turn to when all others have given up. He now helps parents reclaim their lives when conventional medicine says there's nothing more we can do. His new book, Uncurable, From Hopeless Diagnosis to Defying All Odds, chronicles this transformation. A clinical researcher involved in 70-plus studies and VCU assistant clinical professor, he founded Richmond Integrative and Functional Medicine in 2016. Give it up for Dr. Aaron Hartman.
Thanks a lot, Jen. Super excited to be here. Thanks for that amazing introduction.
Absolutely. And we heard some of your story in introducing you, so that allows us to kind of jump into the meat of our conversation. Quickly, though, we have to tell our members what they're getting this week. So friends, join us in the Happy Healthy Hub. Being a member of the Hub is the next best thing to working with me as your health coach. You get a recipe each week delivered to your inbox, curated articles and additional discounts from me and our partners, interview episodes like this one in full video with some behind-the-scenes content, and access to the community board where we can interact, ask and answer questions, and so much more. All of this, by the way, is yours for just $12 a month, or you could prepay a year and you get 2 months free. So a year for $120. I mean, wild. So your recipe this week is for zucchini lasagna roll-ups. Zucchini is in season. If you have a garden, you probably have more zucchini than you know what to do with. So this is a great one to get everyone eating zucchini, the kids too. And also, it's super easy for especially a time of year when you don't really want to spend a ton of time in the kitchen. So to get this recipe, plus this episode in full video, access to our community board where you can ask me anything, go to asaladwithasideoffries.com/membership. From there, you'll click subscribe now, follow the prompts to enter your payment info, create your login to access the hub and all of your benefits. Remember, you're going to asaladwithasideoffries.com/membership. This supports your health and this show so we can continue doing this together every week. Okay. Dr. Aaron, you and your wife are both healthcare providers, and your adoptive daughter's diagnosis of cerebral palsy, or biplegic, right, sent you down this path of functional medicine. So I think maybe just as the foundation, because many aren't necessarily familiar with the intricacies, will you explain sort of cerebral palsy and what about it led you to the functional medicine approach?
Well, cerebral palsy is a neurological condition when a child has an insult before they're born. So typically there's something happens with this decreased blood flow and they get a brain injury and it tends to be global. So, and it depends on what part of the brain's affected. Sometimes it's speech, sometimes it's motor, sometimes it's everything. Sometimes the thing called lock-in syndrome where the person cognitively is really bright, but they just can't use their body. Hers was caused by crystal meth exposure throughout the pregnancy that her birth mother used, as well as she had a stroke before she was born. So she came into the world with a pretty dire diagnosis. And that wasn't what really got us down the functional medicine pathway. My wife is a pediatric occupational therapist, and Anna was actually one of her patients. And when her foster home was closing down, my wife was like, hey, would we consider bringing it into our home? So we did. And what forced me to look at things differently were two inflection moments. One was, she was diagnosed with failure to thrive, which is a fancy way of saying she was just too small, which is very, very typical for special needs kids. And so feeding her as much as we could, goes back to the GI doctor, and the GI doctor is, she's not getting bigger. Let's cut a hole in her stomach and put a feeding tube in there and pour sugar water called formula into her belly, and she'll put some meat on her bones. And we knew that would affect speech because chewing and swallowing is important for that speech, crawling, walking. Now, she was never supposed to walk, talk, or crawl. She was supposed to be a vegetable. So they had really, really, really low expectations, but we had higher expectations. So we said no to that. And the response was that we reported to Child Protective Services for medical neglect.
My goodness.
And so that was my aha moment. Like, wow, the system really doesn't have great answers and they don't like it when you say no. But the major inflection point that really got us off the beaten path was 6 months later when my wife found a growth chart for kids with cerebral palsy. There was actually one specifically for her diagnosis, and she was in the middle. She was normal for her diagnosis. So the specialist didn't know this existed, was recommending a surgery that would totally change her health trajectory. And that's when I realized I don't trust the experts. I need to figure this out because, oh my gosh, if you report us to basically to the authorities for just feeding my daughter real food, which, you say like that's kind of crazy, right? And then you had no idea that you were 100% wrong. Who do you trust? And so that just led me down to getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, pulling research articles on related, unrelated conditions. And, step by step took us off the beaten path. And now my entire practice deals with really complicated patients who've been told by the system, there's nothing we can do for you. We can't help you. It's all in your brain, all in your head. And then I figure out, oh no, it's your Lyme, it's your mold, it's your undiagnosed autoimmune disease. It's, your Lyme disease that no one believes even exists. It's your long COVID that is supposed to be gone because the government just stopped paying for all this research for it. So it's magically cured now, right? And so realizing that there's so many more options out there, and Uncurable is just is a tag that it's like idiopathic. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Or this is as good as it gets. So if I don't know what's going on, it's idiopathic in the medical world. Or if this is as good as it gets, you're uncurable. And those are labels that I refuse to accept.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned Lyme, long COVID, mold, undiagnosed autoimmune. Are there any other sort of diagnoses that you tend to see a lot of and see respond really well to the approach that you work with in your practice?
Well, there's a group of things called mast cell activation syndrome, which I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but there's a couple things. It's called the pentad super syndrome, to get fancy on you here. So it's mast cell activation syndrome, it's hypermobility, which is a whole other thing. It's autoimmune issues, gut problems, and POTS or dysautonomia. And so these things live in the house. If you have one of them, you most likely have another one. And so, if you have anxiety, I wake up in the middle of the night and my heart's racing. I get dizzy sometimes. I can't handle the heat. I go by scents and I feel really kind of weird. Like that could be a mast cell dysautonomia thing. You've got brain zaps. You have mood swings. You have really bad depression, or someone says you're bipolar and you just feel weird inside your body. It's like maybe you have an undiagnosed tick-borne issue that's triggering mast cell stuff. And so once you realize that there's a lot of similar patterns, it's just layering on therapy. Is this more a dysautonomia patient? Then all of a sudden, fluids, electrolytes, sometimes actually certain kind of medications like low-dose naltrexone, immunoglobulin, antibiotics. If you have gut problems like SIBO, all of a sudden there's a whole new world of therapies that can be used. But the problem is every person is their own therapeutic trial. Every person is their own research trial. So all of a sudden it's like, well, what's the research behind that? I'm like, well, it's working. They're getting better. You're not going to find it. You can't do $1 million research project on one person, right? And that's the kind of medicine I practice is one person at a time. I don't treat 5,000 diabetic patients anymore, right? I treat individuals, and that kind of medicine requires a different kind of skill set.
Yeah, it's interesting. So essentially what you're saying is that there are like these through lines or commonalities in a bunch of different diagnoses, and that tends to be this immune response or an activation in the body that then manifests differently for different people.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to say it. Maybe neural immune, so your nervous system and your immune system, which are closely related. And depending on where you grew up, your life history, what age you got sick at, it can look like a vast, whole different group of things. And one underlying thing that is really interesting is hypermobility, which can be a superpower or kryptonite, where we have lots of elite athletes, lots of really smart people that are hypermobile. If you're hypermobile, you have a 400% increased chance of being neurodivergent. So now all your really smart, quirky people that are like inventing worlds in their head and stuff like that, right? You're scientists. But because of the hypermobility and because their system runs a little hotter or faster, they're more susceptible to nutrient deficiencies, Lyme disease. Lyme really likes, and tick-borne illnesses really like low oxygen tissues. And if your tissues are extra stretchy, they get a little less blood flow, which means you're a little more prone to getting these tick-borne illnesses. So all of a sudden you can have this thing that sets you up for being a super athlete, being super smart, that at the same time, if in the wrong environment, you ever get a chronic health condition.
Yeah. So are there any other things that somebody might be experiencing where, because to your point, a lot of these, like especially Lyme and mold and even POTS, as you mentioned before, it can be a very long process, to say the least, to get to a diagnosis. So are there other symptoms that somebody might be experiencing that would have their ears prick up to say, let me look at the approach that we're talking about today?
Well, you tend to see neurological symptoms, systemic symptoms, and immune symptoms. So the neurological symptoms can be stuff from mood dysregulation, ADHD, can be anxiety. It can be a whole host of things, weird body sensations, buzzing, tingling, zapping kind of stuff. So neuropathy, sometimes people get misdiagnosed with neuropathy. Yeah, I even had one patient who was diagnosed with Bell's palsy, another one was diagnosed with a slip disc in her back, and both of them were actually Lyme patients. So you have these neurological things. The autoimmune is like inflammation, and that can be joint aches and pains, that can be puffiness, that can be, for females, it's interesting how anti-inflammatory your hormones are. And when your hormones get out of whack, all of a sudden, all these things exacerbate. So that's your PMDD. I'm sorry, honey, you're 42 and your hormones are off. It's just that stage in life. And now you're buzzing and tingling and you can't sleep and you feel semi-psychotic. It's no, you had these things there, but your superpower, your hormones are kind of abating. And now this thing that was there for years that they kept down is popping up. And then the inflammatory, just, we now know that inflammation is the underlying cause of like all modern diseases. So, gut problems, IBS, diarrhea, bloating, gas, there's a whole host of things, but those are like the big things. And then there's subcategories of skin manifestations. Sometimes people get prickly, itchy skin rashes, hives. I see a lot of female patients will come in like, I get stressed, I get hives. It's like, ooh, that's a neuroinflammatory condition that shows up on your skin, right? So there's big groupings and subgroupings, and it gets a little complicated, but those are some of the major categories to think in.
Yeah, but I think those are super helpful for people, especially if they're chasing a diagnosis, to say, wait a minute, maybe I don't even need the whole diagnosis. This is a path that I can look at. And shifting into sort of some of the things we can do to address these symptoms, one of the things you said to me last time we spoke is that with these through lines, people tend to major in the minors. Will you say more on that? What do you mean by that?
So they pick one symptom that's the most concerning and they focus on that. And, it could be the brain zaps. It could be the anxiety. It could be the gut problems. It could be the hormone fluctuations. It could be the migraines you get at the end of your cycle. You pick the thing that's the most immediate. And then all of a sudden, like, what can I find on social media? And all of a sudden now you're like, oh, it's a brain tumor, or it's Lyme, or it's multiple sclerosis. When you're a female and you type in a lot of neurological things, multiple sclerosis pops up all the time. And I have to convince my patients, no, it's not MS. There's not a brain tumor. And, $8,000 later, let's focus on, whatever. Those are just some of the ways in which it can kind of pop up and what it can look like.
Yeah. So I want to go down this road, dig a little bit deeper, and start with your big three, the things that we can do to really give the body what it needs to heal. And then also kind of talk about what you were saying about what people find on the internet. So we'll do that after we highlight our sponsor for this episode. On this show, we talk a lot about ditching that all or nothing mentality, especially around food, around fitness, around our daily choices. One meal doesn't ruin everything, and small, consistent steps truly matter more than any bout of perfection. At the same time, that black and white thinking can also show up in our mental health. We wait until we're really struggling to ask for help, as if nothing less than a full crisis just doesn't count. And that's why I really want you to know about BetterHelp. BetterHelp makes it easier to start therapy. No waiting, no all or nothing commitment. Getting the support of a licensed therapist is a tremendous tool in your tool belt, especially if you've been handed a diagnosis. or if you're chasing a diagnosis. So you take a quick quiz, you get matched with a licensed therapist and communicate however works for you. If you want that to be phone, video, text, any is possible. And then if the therapist isn't the right fit, you can switch at no extra cost. Over 6 million people have gotten help through BetterHelp with 4.8 out of 5 stars on the App Store. You could feel confident in reaching out to BetterHelp. Go to betterhelp.com/sideofries and get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/sideofries. And we'll put that link in the show notes for everybody to keep it easy too. Okay, Dr. Hartman, in thinking about these foundations and perfecting the basics, right? You have the big three: sleep, stress, and gut. So let's walk through those. Where do you suggest we start?
I mean, gut is very popular right now. And it really, not to be weird, but I won't say everything, but it seems like almost everything starts in the gut, right? And the gut itself is such a big maze of things. And so I say the gut, stress, and sleep, right? But the gut is not just eating real food, not just avoiding processed food or foods that inflame your nervous system. Like, I won't mention the brand of coffee that's super popular in our country that puts MSG as a flavor enhancer. And everybody will know the name if I said it, but I won't say it here. MSG is a neurostimulant. All of a sudden now, eating real food is not just, a green leafy vegetable. It's, where you're sourcing it from. I make homemade fries, for example, for my kids. I'm using camote. I use olive oil. I make mayonnaise out of healthy omega-3s and omega-6s. I use these ingredients that actually make it a superfood for the brain. And you go out and get fries somewhere else, and all of a sudden it's like, rancid seed oils, genetically not chemical sprayed, fungus ridden, mold ridden potatoes. So you can have the same thing with coffee. You can have healthy coffee and you can have bad coffee. And so sourcing real food becomes super important. But then how's your body respond to it? The gut is also where 75% of all neurotransmitters, I was trying to remember numbers here, sorry. 75% of all neurotransmitters are made in your GI tract, up to 9% of serotonin, which is your happy neurotransmitter, 50% of dopamine, which is your ADHD. It's like the neurotransmitter that gives you like that you seek when you're looking, seeking behaviors kind of thing. And all of a sudden, your gut's important for those things as well. And then the bacteria in your gut, we now know, you have 23,000 genes in your body, but there's 1 million genes in this thing called your microbiome. So all of a sudden now, health of that gut deals not just with eating real food, but it's also creating a place where your gut-brain axis is stable, your gut-heart axis is stable. Oh, by the way, there's a gut-lung axis and a gut-skin axis. So if you've got respiratory problems, asthma, you've got any weird heart issues, palpitations, AFib, you've got any skin rashes, all of a sudden your gut becomes this super critical, ridiculous place to focus on. And you could literally spend years fine-tuning this. So I use the word gut to make it simple. But then when you start getting to advanced stool testing, microbiome testing, short-chain fatty acid testing, it can get kind of complicated. But I start with the basics. You got to eat real food. Something like 80% of all vascular disease is related to lifestyle alone. I'm like, well, so that's such a big foundational thing is your gut health.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the way you bring the gut to the connection to all these other organs. I mean, we could even talk vagus nerve and some of those kinds of things, but we talked about those before too. So I guess where do we go next then with your big three between gut, stress, and sleep?
Well, the big three, it's like what I've noticed in seeing, I've had over 100,000 patient encounters in my 25-year career. What I've noticed is those three places where people get stuck on their healing journey. So if you're stuck and you're like, I'm not getting better, why are you not getting better? Gut, stress, and sleep. And gut also includes nutrition and nutrients, which is another aspect. Stress. Now, stress, people are like, well, why are we all stressed? But I mean, not just like I had a bad day or my kids are crazy or I'm having, issues with my significant other. I mean, we all have a life, but your nervous system gets put in a fight or flight state and gets stuck there. And that's where trauma comes into play. And there's big T trauma, physical, sexual, emotional abuse. But there's also this little t trauma that could just be life. It could be getting poor sleep for a long period of time and in a stressful situation in the pandemic, or you have a chronic health condition, or having kids with special needs. Having a kid with special needs who goes to the hospital every so often, these little micro traumas can put you in this little T trauma state. Your nervous system is jacked up, your cortisol is up, heparin levels are off. Part of dysautonomia or POTS you mentioned, it's actually a dysregulation in the regulatory aspect of your nervous system. And when that's set up, your body won't heal because your body won't think it's safe. Your cells won't heal. And ultimately, nervous system, it's really cool how our body works. It actually sends nerves to these hormone modulators, to these little peptides, to these little signaling things that actually tell our mitochondria, the powerhouse of our cells, hey, the world is safe, let's make new cells, or the world's unsafe, let's hibernate. And in a overactive, dysfunctional nervous system does that. And so if your nervous system doesn't feel like your environment's safe, it will slow down the healing process.
And so if I'm hearing you correctly, then we can interpret this to say quality and quantity sleep, nutrients, and the quality of our food help send safety signals to the nervous system, which then translates into how the body is functioning throughout.
Correct. Yeah. And food is not just nutrition, food is information. And I think most people know what a micro mRNA is now with all the COVID vaccine stuff, but there's peptides in foods we eat. If you eat actually fresh green foods that aren't overcooked, that aren't microwaved, they actually come with this information that actually programs your gut bacteria. You'll absorb some of that and actually programs our cells to do certain things. So literally the food you eat, if it's fresh, whole, real, unprocessed, unadulterated, actually contains information for the cells in our body to do certain things. And so it gets super crazy nuanced, but then the concept is just eat real food, right? And I didn't mention sleep, you kind of alluded to it, but sleep is when your body resets itself. It's when our immune systems regulate. It's when inflammation's controlled. And chronic poor sleep drives inflammation and immune dysregulation. So all of a sudden, if you're not sleeping adequately, how's your body going to heal, right?
So now I have two questions floating around in my mind, and we can address them in sequence. So coming back to the nutrition piece, you talk a lot about rare earth minerals and trace minerals that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about. So will you speak to that? And then I'd also love to hear the other question in my mind is, what are some of the tips and tricks and recommendations that you have around that sleep piece?
So everybody's familiar with magnesium and potassium and calcium, like the big minerals, but there's over 90 minerals and trace minerals and rare earth minerals that our body needs to function. Molybdenum, strontium, silica, like things you never even heard of. And some of the things we don't even know what they do. We just know you need them. Well, what's the source for those? Well, we typically get those from animals that concentrate. Basically, they come from the soil. They grow into grass and the fescue. Then an animal will eat that. A cow eats like something like chews and swallows like 16 to 18 hours a day and super concentrates all its stuff into their bones or tissues. And so what happens is organ meats, bones and connective tissues, and ruminators super concentrate this. Well, what did we remove from our diets in the 1950s? Organ meat, bone broth. Bone broth is really popular. Collagen's really popular. Why are these things popular? Why do some people, probably some of your audience, I started collagen, my hair got better, I felt better, my nails are better. I started doing minerals. I started doing these, bone broth, and all of a sudden now I'm healing better. It's because there's this massive deficiency of this nutrient in our diet because we've removed it away from eating certain foods. And all of a sudden people will supplement them and, I feel so much better. But it's like, to your point, it's actually a countrywide deficiency in these essential minerals, rare earth minerals, and trace minerals because we removed this food from our diets.
And so is your recommendation then going back to some of those organ meats that's certainly not on the top of anybody's list of choices?
Well, it's funny because there are African cultures that when a female is at childbearing age, they actually preferentially give her organ meat in preparation. She's got engaged. Oh my gosh, now we do this. After child, they'll separate them and the husband and feed her organ meats preferentially. They kind of figured out over hundreds of thousands of years, if women eat this, they have healthier babies, right? That's part of it. It's also bone broth. I remember watching a Leave It to Beaver episode when I was a kid, and Wally and the guys were playing, and Joan was in the kitchen starting to make lunch at like 3 o'clock, dinner at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? She goes in the fridge, pulls out a bone shank, puts it in a pot and starts boiling it. And I remember looking at it and going, huh? But in that time frame, that was such a normal thing to see that you could be part of a sitcom, whatever thing, and no one would blink an eye. Oh yeah, the wife is getting ready to make food and she pulled a bone out of the fridge, So bone broth, and it's really simple. It's super cheap. It's taking the discard of your chicken, it's taking the leftover bones and sinew from your meats, and you freeze them, save them, and you can make your own bone broth out of it. So those are nutrient-based ways, but also there's supplements you can use. And I realize it's hard to do this. So of course there's supplements, but I tend to go back to whole foods because they're so complex and there's so much we just still don't know about nutrition that exists in nature that me taking out the things I know that are good,
yes,
and not giving everything else, I think you lack something with that.
Yes. Okay, great. And then the sleep piece. How can we help support this quality restorative detoxifying sleep?
It's hard because our entire society and technology is built around controlling when we wake and when we sleep. Right now it's recording this and it's June 5th. I'm in Virginia, and right now the sun is rising at about 5:45ish right now. I can't sleep past 6 o'clock, in the morning. I mean, I'll try to, but once that sunlight, my body wants to get up. In the middle of the wintertime, I can sleep till 7:30. And we're no longer respecting the natural daylight circadian rhythms of our body and nature. And we're basically controlling that. And then we're limiting it. As an adult, you probably need about 8.5 hours of sleep a night. How many Americans get that? The answer is less than 20%. So just trying to when you go to bed, I mean, it's not gonna be perfect, right? But doing it sometime close to when the sun rises, getting up sometime around, and that might be off by an hour, but respecting that, not shining crazy, all these, I got those LED crazy bright lights in my face right now. Don't do that before you go to bed. Just respecting that. And then obviously don't do anything activating before you go to bed, avoiding screens. Don't watch. I'm 53 now, and I can't watch anything exciting anytime close to bedtime. Otherwise, my mind just wanders for hours. So just not doing stimulating things before bedtime. And these are basic common sense things that make sense. But when we ask people to do them, they're like, well, I want to doom scroll for an hour in bed. I'm like, well, I'm probably not going to sleep that good.
Yeah. I mean, we can be our own best enemies at times. And so I think along with that, I can hear someone saying, I hear what you're saying. I get it. And yes, this also sounds kind of boring and or a lot of effort. So how can we make this easier? How do we address the people looking for that magic bullet?
I mean, there's not a magic bullet. That's the thing. Like, they were talking about, your body is the most complicated thing there is, and you have to respect that. And it takes a long time to get sick. I mean, what amazes me is how long it takes for someone to develop an autoimmune disease. If you have positive thyroid antibodies, it could be 10 years before you actually get Hashimoto's. If you have a positive ANA, it could be 20 before you get lupus. Like, it's amazing how much it actually takes for our bodies to get sick and for us to feel unwell. And so that's what I'm amazed by. And then when people start making, I'm eating real food, I'm getting better sleep, I'm not stressing as much, all of a sudden it's amazing to see how quickly people's bodies will start to heal and self-repair. And so I think in our quick fix society and culture, we want everything quick, we want everything now. Great, then take your medication, go to your doctor, take your antibiotics, take your medication, get the surgery, do the standard things. If you really want your body to get on a healing pathway, you're gonna have to do some hard things. My daughter, part of her story, she's 20. She was never supposed to walk, talk, or crawl. She has beat every single odd. She's had antibiotics once in her adult lifetime. She's had no cavities. I mean, how many people who've been exposed to crystal meth have no cavities, right? And she's actually my first kid who's getting ready to move out of the house this summer. So all of a sudden, it's like, if you want to see near miraculous outcomes, you really have to be willing to do things that other people aren't willing to do, which unfortunately is the basics, is the stuff that we all should be doing. And which is just, everybody wants a supplement. Everybody wants a magic pill. Everybody wants, a lot of my Lyme patients, they come in, I've actually had Lyme patients heal without antibiotics because we respect how the body naturally does stuff, and we actually have to deal with their immune system stuff. And all of a sudden, it's like your body wants to heal, wants to get better. So I wish I had a magic pill. If I would take it myself and sell it, but I don't. I have stuff that works, but it's hard.
Yeah. And then along those same lines, I can imagine someone saying, okay, what I haven't heard from you are any of the coping mechanisms, especially the ones that I see a lot of people turning to, whether that's cookies or alcohol or whatever. And that's certainly not part of this whole real food heal the system, piece of things. You talked about making your own fries, but so what do you want those people to know in terms of balancing sort of the things that help them cope versus the things that maybe are counterproductive?
I think it depends where you're all on your healing journey. If you're someone, I just want to feel a little better, then having that cheat day, 1 day a week, 1 meal a day, I mean, that's okay, right? But if you're dealing with chronic fatigue, fibro, you're a female has PCOS, you have fertility issues, you're having horrible PMDD, then all of a sudden you're going to need to do more than just, you need to perfect the basics. Professional athletes, one of the analogies I think about is like a professional soccer players perfect passing, kicking. They don't perfect all this cool stuff. They perfect the basics. And that's what we forget. We focus on the fancy supplements, the fancy objects, and it's really the basics that get our body on the track to healing and self-repair. And so I think, to what you're saying, I get it. We have these cravings, these foods are addictive. Sugar is addictive. It's really interesting, the study looking at mice. And if you give them high fructose corn syrup and you give them access and they get addicted to it and you give them access to cocaine and then you let them choose, they choose the high fructose corn syrup. And it's not surprising that we are addicted to these addictive foods. These dopamine, there's a great book, Anna Lembke, I think, The Dopamine Nation. And it all talks about we have created a culture of addiction. And when you say it like that, people are like, I was talking with one, Fallon. She grew up the nourishing tradition. She's like, one of the OGs, she's, back in the day. And she used the term pornographic foods. And when she said that on my podcast, I was just like, oh my gosh, that's controversial. Like, I'm like, can I say that? Did she say that? Like, do I need to bleep that out? Pornographic foods. But as I was thinking about it, it is kind of engineered to activate dopamine, which is addictive. And so I hear that. I understand that. I have kids. I've got a 15-year-old son who is addicted to sugar, even though we don't have a lot in the house. And he will go to camp and splurge and he comes back and he's 100% dysregulated for 3 to 5 days. I hear that. It's just, if you want to have an outcome you don't see your friends having, you have to be willing to do things that your friends aren't doing, and that's kind of what it comes down to.
Absolutely. So to wrap this up, your book is called Uncurable. And I think when people receive a diagnosis in that category or a diagnosis of something chronic, or when the Western medical system says that line of, there's nothing else we can do, and it sends people down a rabbit hole, right? What do you want everyone listening today to know about finding reliable, vetted sources for their information?
I mean, you have to, I want them to know about the reliable, vetted sources. Thought you were going with somewhere else that question, but
well, okay, we could go where answer both. Yeah.
Well, I thought you were going was like, what do I tell those people? And the answer is, what I thought you were going to ask is that there are answers out there. Everybody, when you're 80, your body still has the ability to self-heal and self-repair. You break your leg, it'll still heal. It might take a year or two. And when you're 12, your body just does it a lot better. So our bodies were made to self-heal and self-repair. The question is, have you maximized that for your age, for your situation? And the answer typically is no. And so when you're stuck, we've told there's nothing else that can be done for you. That just means there's nothing else that they can do for you. It doesn't mean there's nothing else that can be done. And my clinic, we have patients who with multiple sclerosis go into remission, people with chronic Lyme go into remission, post-concussive syndrome with chronic anxiety and ADD go into remission. So I've seen this happen so many times. The first couple of times you're like, wow, this actually works. Now it's just like, you get kind of used to it after a while. So there is hope. And the purpose of the book is to is to put that little nugget there of there is hope, there are answers, but you have to be an active participant in your health. You can't expect someone else to give it to you. As far as the information thing, that's a hard question because there's so much bad information out there. There's so many influencers that had their life experience and now they're an expert. It's like, well, you're an expert in your life, but that doesn't apply to millions of people. And so because of that, I've set up on my website this buffet of information. We have over 400 blogs on stuff from hormonal health to POTS and dysautonomia to detoxification. I have a book reading list. I've vetted probably about 500 books at this stage. And we have about 70 or 80 books on our website. And they all have an audible version so you can listen to it. Or if people want to learn, we have our own podcast. We have our own social media. I've tried to create this reservoir of information for my patients, because what I found was my patients, I'd see them every 2 or 3 months and they come back and they'd go down these rabbit trails. I'd spend half my time correcting misinformation. And so I kind of created my own ecosystem where it's like, look, if you want to look at social media, look at this here. If you're going to read books, look at this here, just so people can learn how to get engaged with their own health without going down the wrong pathway. Because most information out there, unfortunately, it might be well-meaning and well-intentioned, but it tends to lead people off the track for them. And ultimately, you want to find what's going to work for you, not what worked for someone else. And that's a lot of times requires working with a skilled clinician to help you get an individualized, personalized healthcare plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that, for creating that resource for everybody, because I think it's tremendously valuable. All right, it is time for our rapid fire off-topic questions. You ready?
Uh-oh.
All right. What's the best thing you've done for your health this week? What's the naughtiest thing you've done related to your health this week? Like the salad and fries of your week.
Yeah. The best thing I've done for my health this week is actually I started mowing my yard with a push mower about 2 weeks ago. So we have about a 2-acre plot of land. And so instead of doing the riding mower, I'm taking 4 days to mow my yard instead of 2 hours. The worst thing I did this past week was actually the end of last week is I made a big batch of chocolate chip cookies. Now they were dark chocolate, cane sugar, einkorn flour, all the right ingredients, but they were so yummy too. Oh my gosh, they're so good.
I know, I'm coming to eat at your house. All right. If you weren't a doctor and founder of Richmond Integrative and Functional Medicine, what would you do?
I'll probably be in some kind of trade. I really like working with my hands. We have a little farm here that we raise our own cows and chickens and stuff. So raise our own beef. So I probably would either be a farmer or be in some kind of trade. I'm using my hands, being outside, because I really enjoy using my hands and being outside.
Favorite book on any topic other than your area of expertise, or you could give us a fiction book.
That really depends on what I have read or what I'm reading. I read the Gulag Archipelago probably a year and a half ago, and it was very impactful because it really kind of helped me realize, how would I respond in that situation? And it made me really question, would I actually live out my convictions the way people have in really repressive societies? That's kind of more of a dark kind of thing, but that's the most recent impactful book. I read probably 50 books a year. This answer will depend on what I've read most recently.
That's a big one, though. All right. If you could cure one ailment, disease, or sickness, what would it be?
Probably dysautonomia, which includes POTS and includes a bunch of different things. It tends to be the thing that really sticks a lot of my patients. And it's a hard sell because a lot of specialists say it's not a thing. They say POTS is still a psychiatric issue. It's like, if you don't get blood to your brain, it's not going to feel safe and you're going to feel pretty bad, And so if I could find a magic thing and fix that, that's where a lot of my patients in their healing journey, and that's where the trauma, stress thing come into play. They get stuck, and the way it looks in their body is this thing called dysautonomia.
Yeah. If you were a superhero, what would be your superpower?
I'd want to have a super brain.
Ooh.
My wife and I have had these conversations. I want to remember everything I've ever seen or heard and be able to access it, but be normal, not be weird, I can't talk to people. But have a super brain.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
Man, this is where being a parent comes into play. My biggest pet peeve is talking with individuals, and I'm speaking as a father here, who know you and trust you, and then watching them do absolutely nothing you recommended, even though you are the expert in this thing. It's a pet peeve. And I think everybody experiences that, right? There's a saying, no prophet goes without honor except in their own land among their own people. Not a prophet, but the idea is that you're an expert everywhere except for the people who know you the best, which is quite annoying.
1,000%. All right, last one. In your opinion, what's the next frontier in wellness?
Oh, the next frontier in wellness is lipid medicine.
Say more.
You heard it here first. So the idea is using fats to heal your body. DNA works in mitochondria, ribosomes, and cells, but what are all they made out of? Phospholipid bilayers. Basically, it's a fat envelope. And for that to work, you have to have the right balance of omega-3s, 6s, phospholipids, and toxins and chemicals get stuck in these membranes. And so you can have toxin exposure 20 years ago, and it's still stuck in your DNA in these lipid rafts and these things. And so in my clinic, I'm using IV phosphatidylcholine. I'm using oral things like TUDCA, butyrate, things that actually drive our body to make new, fresh things out of healthy fats. And this is part of the whole thing, the last 35 years, fat's bad, low fat this. And all of a sudden, as of January this year, fat's back. Maybe one of the reasons we're seeing, and there's many, many reasons, but we're seeing more chronic issues is we've basically removed healthy fats from our diet, replaced it with partially plasticized fats, which is what these things are. And our cell membranes are mucked up. Well, how do you fix that? You can obviously change your diet, eat real fat, but there's a way you can actually medically use balanced omega-3s and 6s, phospholipids, TUDCA, ursodiol, butyrate, these things that actually, this also includes trace minerals and rare earth minerals, because that's an important part of this, to actually, literally, we do an oral change of your entire body. And that's something we use with a lot of our mast cell patients. We use a lot with our mold patients, our Lyme patients. The one patient I alluded to before who had the Lyme, who got better without antibiotics, she had been on antibiotics for a year. And we realized, when she started working with us and realized that she had mold, we started detoxifying her, and we used lipids. And I got to watch her Lyme bands disappear over a year without antibiotics. And it was really cool, not just to read it, but to actually see it happen. So lipid medicine.
I love it. Well, Dr. Aaron Hartman, thank you for being here. Tell everybody where to find your book, Uncurable, From Hopeless Diagnosis to Defying All Odds, and connect with you and everything you have to offer.
The single biggest place is just aaronhartmanmd.com. It's the landing page that takes you to the book, which is uncurablebook.com. My practice, which is richmondfunctionalmedicine.com. My podcast, which is Made for Health and all that stuff. So the one site, you want to go one place that leads to the one road that leads, the one place that goes to every place, that'd be aaronhartmanmd.com.
Perfect. We'll put the links and everything so everybody can find you. Well, thank you again for being here. Appreciate your time and expertise and sharing everything with everyone and the work that you do in the world. So thank you.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate you inviting me to your show.
Absolutely. All right, friends, on Friday in this week's bite-sized bonus episode, we're talking about clear protein seltzer. So a friend of mine, shout out Alyssa, texted me and said, what do you think of these? And she sent me a link to 2 different products that were sparkling waters with protein. And while I fully believe we do not need protein in every single thing that we consume, one of the brands, it was Clean Simple Eats is the company. They had all of the info that we would need to look at. So we'll do it together on Friday in this week's bite-sized bonus episode. So be sure, wherever you're listening, click the plus sign or the follow button, and then your app will alert you when it goes live. Well, as always, everybody, I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck. Connect with me on Instagram or all social media. I am at Jenn Trepeck, JENNTREPECK. Website is asaladwithasideoffries.com. Pick your platform, send a message. I love hearing from you, your takeaways, your ideas, your questions. This is also the easiest way to learn more about working with me as your coach. Dr. Aaron Hartman, thank you again for joining us this week.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. And friends, if you are not already a member, join us in the Happy Healthy Hub. You'll go to asaladwithasideoffries.com/membership. This shows your support for this podcast, this community, and above all, your health. On top of this week's episode, in full video with some behind the scenes content, your 24/7 Ask Me Anything on the community board. You'll get this week's recipe for zucchini lasagna roll-ups. So until next week, remember, even if you've been handed what feels like a hopeless diagnosis, you likely still have options with a functional medicine toolkit. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform, share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it and you are worth it. Happy healthy.